Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to run through the results and give an overview before clocking in and going to bed. It's well past 3 o'clock in the morning. We have a lot of the results in, and I just wanted to touch on exactly what happened and took place here for the midterms of 2018. Going to go over the House, the Senate, and the governorships in just kind of a general sense and give my take on why I think certain things happened or what the parties can take away as either positives or negatives potentially from these results. So starting off in the House, was it a blue wave? I'm going to say that the Democrats came up short of calling it a true blue wave. For it to get that moniker, I think they needed to pick up at least 40 seats, if not pushing towards 50 or more. That's not going to be the case here for the Democrats. They're going to pick up more in the range of about 30 to 35 seats, which is still good, respectable, and enough for them to get the majority in the House, but it's not the overwhelming wave that they were hoping for to pick up even more seats. Now, the positive for the Democrats is they control the House now. So the Republicans, what they've had the last 2 years, control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. The Republican agenda could essentially pass whatever legislation that they wanted to, as long as they got all of their Republicans to sign onto the legislation. Obviously, easier said than done, even when you have the majority in each chamber. So the Democrats can put a halt to that. No more talk about repealing Obamacare, for instance, because the House isn't going to go with that now that the Democrats are in charge, or repealing pre-existing conditions protections, or just a host of other things that Republicans would have tried to pass through Congress potentially if they continued to have control of all the chambers. So the Democrats, where did they do well? In general, it seems like these Republican districts that they were able to flip were more of the moderate Republican type districts that come in blue states like New York, Virginia, California, for instance, and where Democrats maybe didn't do as well as they were hoping. You look at states like Florida, Indiana, Ohio, for instance, where maybe they weren't able to pick up as many flips as they thought were potentially possible. And now the two factions of these parties, I don't think that either can claim clear victory and say, well, we have a mandate from the voters that this is the way our party should go. And obviously with the Democrats, that's the populist and progressive wing versus the more centrist and establishment wing of the party. We'll see how that dynamic plays out for the Democrats in the future. And then with the Republicans, it's the Trump faction versus the more moderate faction like the John Kasichs, for instance. And really it's more of those districts where there's probably more Republican voters that would favor somebody like a Kasich over a Trump are the districts that went over to Democrats this time around. And really these moderate Republicans seem to be somewhat of a dying breed. We'll see if there's a swing back at some point in the future, but Republicans as a whole, given especially what happened over in the Senate, feel like they are solidly the party of Trump at this point. So we'll go over and talk about the Senate here. And this is where there certainly was nothing even close to a blue wave. The Republicans had a very favorable map coming in to the midterms of 2018. And just given the national landscape and how the generic congressional ballot was looking so strong for the Democrats and their voter enthusiasm was so strong, that the Democrats thought that they could not only fend off all of these challenges, but maybe even pick up a seat or two. Well, that simply wasn't the case. Even though the Democrats have had that voter enthusiasm basically ever since Trump was elected, the Republicans have come online and closed that gap, certainly in the closing months going towards these elections, which allowed them to pick up a lot of these Senate seats in what are Republican-leaning states. And I think a major difference maker here for the Republicans was Trump going around and campaigning in these areas where he did very well. That allowed them to pick up Senate seats, for instance, in Indiana and Missouri, which a lot of people would consider maybe slight upsets given the incumbency advantage with Joe Donnelly and McCaskill, 538. Had these as being competitive, but maybe slightly leans over to the Democrats. And also a very Trump state in North Dakota. He had a positive effect there with Cramer going on and winning that Senate election, for instance. And then areas where the Democrats thought that they maybe could have surprise and pick up wins and taking them from the Republicans, coming up well short in the state of Tennessee. Maybe a little bit more competitive than just your average Senate race in Tennessee, but still Bredesen, the popular former governor, coming up well short here against Blackburn by about 11 percentage points. Texas, a bit of a different story than Tennessee. Beto O'Rourke, a respectable result here from a more progressive populist candidate here, coming up short by a little less than 3 percentage points. For the state of Texas, having a Senate race this close is somewhat obviously a referendum on Ted Cruz not being all that popular of a candidate, but also just For the Democrats, maybe what they can take out of this is if you have a candidate that really excites your base to turn out in a wave, that can make these results in deeper red states possible, and O'Rourke getting just a tremendous amount of turnout from the Democratic voters, but also dipping in and doing well with independents and maybe even getting some crossover votes from the Republicans on top of that, able to get this to an extremely close result in the state of Texas. And you can kind of contrast that O'Rourke's populist progressive message in making things close in Texas to Tennessee. Phil Bredesen, basically Republican light, more of a centrist, moderate Democrat. And it seems like the days of moderate Democrats doing well in Republican states in the Senate might be over. No more in Indiana, Missouri, or North Dakota. It looks like Tester could possibly lose his seat here in Montana. Not over by any stretch of the imagination, obviously, with 35% of the votes still outstanding. But Tester losing by 4,000 votes right now, that's another one that the Republicans could flip. And then you go over down to Florida, which is the state that probably had the biggest disappointments overall for the Democrats in the midterms here, losing the Senate matchup, and then we'll also talk about the governor's matchup once we get over to that. But Florida, it's always a close race, it seems. Bill Nelson coming up short here as the incumbent. And it's just one of those situations where Nelson had a very tough candidate to go against because of how well Rick Scott is known as the governor of the state. Perhaps if it's just some run-of-the-mill Republican that didn't have that name recognition, maybe Nelson comes through and retains this seat, but he wasn't able to do that in Florida. Probably one of the, I wouldn't necessarily say biggest surprises, because maybe you could make an argument that Missouri and Indiana were bigger surprises, especially with the margin of victory there, but a very disappointing result there for the Democrats as well. Where did Democrats do well, though, in the Senate? So you take a look at the Midwest here. Wisconsin winning by double digits. Michigan winning, right now it's by about 6 points, but basically all of the vote left, I believe, based on the map that I looked at, was in the Detroit area. So you'd expect Stabenow to increase on her lead probably to 10 percentage points or so, maybe even higher than that, depending on how much of that vote is actually concentrated in that Detroit area. Minnesota, a blowout there with Klobuchar, as well as winning the special election by over 10 percentage points. People forget Minnesota, obviously it's a left-leaning Midwestern state, but Trump only lost Minnesota by, I believe, less than 1 percentage point. So those types of margins here are very positive. Also Pennsylvania winning by over double digits. In Ohio, Sherrod Brown winning by a little less than double digits here, more about 7 percentage points, but also holding on to West Virginia. All of the congressional districts went for Republicans, but the Senate staying with Joe Manchin, and that's basically the only extremely red state at this point that the Democrats were able to hold on to. It was going to be an extremely difficult map here for the Democrats in 2018, but based on the playing field and the just national picture of everything as a whole for the Democrats, they thought they weren't only going to be able to defend all of these incumbency seats that they had, but maybe also pick up a couple of surprises here and there. That just wasn't the case. And they were able to keep Joe Manchin, but even this, he only won by about 3 percentage points. And in his last election 6 years ago, he won by over 20 percentage points, so not doing nearly as well there. Trump, again, targeting West Virginia to try to flip to the Republicans, wasn't able to quite do that, but he had success doing it in other states. And then just taking a look at some of these other states that haven't been decided yet, we have Arizona extremely close. When I look at this tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised if either of these candidates went on to win with still almost half the precincts left to be counted. It just basically depends on where those precincts are located. Still a lot around the Phoenix area. It's going to be a very close result there in Arizona. But the positive here for the Democrats is it looks like they are going to be able to take Nevada with Jacky Rosen over the incumbent Dean Heller. And again, up in Montana, Jon Tester a little bit short right now. We'll see how that plays out. But kind of just the overarching theme of the Senate map, if we go back to 2016, the states that were extremely Trump, he was able to flip by having his own presence of campaigning in these states and really nationalizing these states to help out the Republican Party. But states that were extremely close in 2016, the Democrats actually did quite well. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, even holding on to West Virginia, for instance. Definitely positives to take away, certainly in the Midwestern states. The Democrats were expected to hold these states, but the fact that they didn't lose them in surprises like they did some of these other states is somewhat of a positive to take. And then also Clinton winning Nevada. It looks like the Democratic push there is going to be able to claim this seat. And then also Arizona, very close in 2016. Trump was able to win it at the end of the day. We'll see how this one plays out. But that's just kind of the overall wrap-up here of the Senate. It obviously was not a blue wave here. The Republicans were able to make some gains. The Republicans, they've been looking forward to this 2018 midterm map for their Senate candidates for a long time, and they are going to be able to make some of those gains. It's definitely not a disappointment for them in the Senate, even though it probably would have been a lot better if Hillary Clinton was the president, for instance. Maybe they would have had a better shot at picking up some of these Midwestern states. There wouldn't have been as much Democratic voter enthusiasm, but that is a different world that we're not currently living in. So now we're going to move over to the governor's matchups, and there's some positives for the Democrats also to take away from the governorships. I'd say more so positives to take away here from the Democrats than they can take from the Senate. They're picking up governorships in Maine, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Kansas, and that one really stands out for obvious reasons, being here in the Plains states, but then also picking up New Mexico, which isn't quite as big of a surprise, and it looks like they're also doing pretty well out in Nevada, trying to pick that one up. And then we take a look at over in the state of Georgia, extremely close. It looks like Abrams is going to come up a little bit short, and it's not going to go to a runoff. You have to get over 50% of the vote to avoid the runoff. Kemp currently has that. And it does look like Abrams is probably going to come up short. But Georgia, if you look in recent history, going back, the past decade or 2 decades, Georgia's voting has actually been pretty inelastic, where the Republicans typically win by a little less than double digits in these statewide elections, maybe around 8 percentage points or so. The fact that the Democrats are able to close this to about 2 points, that's a positive sign for a state that is very diverse and also has the advantage of these southeastern states of having a very large metropolitan area like Atlanta that's having a liberalizing effect on a lot of those districts around the Atlanta area. That's making Georgia very competitive, almost becoming in the vein of a state like Florida, for instance, in these southeastern states where it's a little bit of an anomaly in comparison to some of the other states. I'd say the biggest disappointment maybe of any result for the Democrats is, let's scroll down here a little bit, Ron DeSantis. I'd say this is an upset of Andrew Gillum because basically every single poll that we saw had Andrew Gillum ahead, and a lot of them were by more than the margin of error. Out of all the results in the governorships, for instance, this is the biggest surprise in the negative for the Democrats, kind of like Kansas would be the biggest surprise in the negative for Republicans, with Chris Kobach coming up short against Laura Kelly. But I thought that Andrew Gillum was going to increase turnout so much among unlikely voters that he wasn't only going to win the governorship, but it was going to have a trickle-down positive effect for Bill Nelson to win the Senate race. And what's surprising is Gillum actually did worse in his head-to-head matchup against DeSantis than the Scott Nelson matchup did on the Senate side. So that clearly wasn't the case where Gillum was going to have a positive down ballot effect in pushing Nelson over the line. If anything, it might have been the reverse in getting Gillum closer to DeSantis, but still very disappointing for the Democrats here in the state of Florida, a state that is always extremely close. And in midterm elections, usually the Republicans do a little bit better in Florida than in the presidential election, so we'll see how things play out in this extremely competitive state 2 years from now as we go into a presidential year. But another, I'd say, surprise for the Democrats is that they weren't able to pick up Iowa. Fred Hubbell was doing pretty well in the polls, and he comes up short, losing to the incumbent Kim Reynolds. The Republicans retain a lot of these incumbencies up here in the northeastern portion. Connecticut's still outstanding. We'll see how that one finishes up, but the Republicans are ahead in that one as well. The Democrats were hoping they could maybe pick up South Dakota, coming up just short there. Oklahoma, not maybe doing as well as the Democrats were hoping to at least get it to single digits. South Carolina, another one that was expected to maybe be a little bit interesting, but the Democrats coming up short by about 9 percentage points in that one. But still making gains here, and that can have a positive effect, certainly in states like Wisconsin when redistricting comes up here in the next couple of years. Michigan obviously isn't going to have that redistricting because they voted that proposition. That's going to have an independent commission draw the next districts. But also Pennsylvania, they redrew their district, so that's kind of off the board anyways, but having a Democratic governor retained in Pennsylvania. Another disappointment for the Democrats is Richard Cordray coming up short. Many thought that he had a chance there, especially with Sherrod Brown winning the Senate matchup, but coming up short there in the governorship. And as a whole, again, some positives to take from the Democrats, but not the overwhelming wave that they were hoping for. Some positives, some negatives. And that's pretty much going to wrap up this video, guys. Just to quickly go through everything again, Democrats doing pretty well in the House. They're going to take control. Republicans doing better than expected in the Senate, picking up a lot of these seats in states where Trump beat Clinton by significant margins. He went into those states and had a significant impact on flipping these Senate races away from a lot of incumbent Democrats. And then also there's a handful of positives to take for the Democrats, flipping 7 of these governorships, at least at this point in time. Also looking pretty good in Nevada. That's an 8th flip if they grab that one as well. So a mixed bag across the board. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, there's things to be disappointed about. There's things to be encouraged about. And I'm going to continue to make these videos going here in the next couple of weeks as we get the full results from these elections and going back over my prediction videos as well, kind of doing a comparison on exactly what happened there. So thanks for stopping on in, guys. Subscribe for more, and I hope to see you back here for future videos.